Hello, everybody, and welcome to Untethered.tv. I'm your host and founder, Rob Woodbridge. This is the place you come to each and every week to find out what is going on in the mobile industry, to look a little bit behind the scenes, to get some ideas, to learn from the experts out there that are doing the things maybe that you should be doing, maybe things, little bits and pieces of what they're doing you should be bringing into your business. Do not copy these guys. That is an insult. Modify, bring ideas into your business, and then go and execute. That's why you come here. And every once in a while, it's great. I get to bring back a guest, and this is what I love about it. This industry is that it has evolved in the year since this guest has been on, and it's a very interesting space, especially when you start to talk about some of the new entrants into this space. We're talking about digital radio. We're talking about radio. Guys like Songza, RDO, Spotify, all these guys are now Pandora went public. Household names now in the digital radio space. And I spoke with Patrick last October, Patrick Reynolds from Triton Digital, last October about what was going on in the space. And I just can't imagine what has happened in the 1 year since we have spoken last. I do know one thing, Patrick, is that you are no longer EVP of Marketing. You are the Chief Strategic Officer for Triton. Welcome, man. Thanks for coming back.
It's my pleasure. It was a lot of fun last year, and I'm sure this year will be equally fun.
Well, yes, that's the hope. You know, I'm very interested, in framing this conversation because so much has happened in the last year since we've actually sat down. Quite a bit of activity in the space that you're in. Obviously, you guys have succeeded. You're still around and growing, which is incredible. But also the expectations have been risen, and certain reports that you guys have even come out with are talking about the digital subscriber, the digital user versus the traditional user in media, and the disconnect with trust between the digital and traditional in trust for the brands. We're also talking about, how can newspapers or how can radios avoid the same fate as what we're seeing in the newspaper and printing industry, and also really want to understand your impact on your customers in the year that you've since our last interview. But why don't we start first off and just remind everybody what Triton Digital does?
Well, we provide technology to basically the audio space. So that's the traditional radio stations in the US and in Canada and Europe and Asia and the Middle East and Africa, so virtually globally, that allows them to monetize their content. So we deliver the content to mobile and computers. We insert ads on a one-to-one basis into those devices as appropriate so that the publisher can maximize the revenue potential of their audience. And we measure this space to let them know how many people are listening, for how long, on what device, and in what location. So those are basically the three big pillars of the business. And then we support that core with a really robust series of applications that we provide for them that allows them to keep customers engaged for longer, keep them coming back more often, and critically, it provides sort of a two-way conduit between the publisher and the publishing audience.
Has that changed in the year since we last spoke? That's pretty much what you guys were doing a year ago?
It has. It's pretty much what we were doing a year ago, and in fact, in some situations, we've actually kind of gotten a little smaller, a little tighter, a little bit more focused. As the market has shifted, we found that some things resonated more than others, and we've actually sort of limited our scope a little bit and gone deeper into certain areas.
Is there a good example of something that shifted that you guys, you were aiming at a year ago and it has kind of disappeared or shifted or is not popular?
Well, things like group buying was really big when we last spoke.
Yes,
it was a huge thing, and we were right there. And it had a short, happy life that was, very kind of big for a time, Rob. And then it's kind of come right back down to earth as more than parity has set in the marketplace. And there's just an infinite number of ways to do that. And it's not really something that radio is uniquely qualified to offer. So it's there. It's just at a much lower level than maybe the optimism I had a year ago for it.
Yeah, I think everybody has adjusted their optimism for the group buying world, including the companies that are public and flailing right now. It's an interesting thing. Has anything emerged in the last year for you guys that you think that maybe wasn't on the radar? I remember our conversation was very candid, and you guys were very honest. You were very honest about the fact, listen, nobody saw this smartphone revolution happening, and if you did, you're lying. So what was it was there anything that surprised you guys in the last year? Not on things that you've gotten rid of, but the things that have emerged.
Well, I'd say there's maybe two or three of those, Rob. The first is we've seen the real titans of industry, the Goliaths of technology, get involved in the space almost kind of all at once. Within sort of a 30 or 60-day time frame, we had Apple make strong overtures that they would be coming to market with a radio product, essentially. We had Microsoft announce that radio would be part and parcel, and an important part and parcel of their Xbox platform and some of their new Windows technology. That's something that, you know, I'd be lying to you if I said I foresaw that a year ago. People like Nokia are using music and radio as a differentiator in handsets on a mobile basis, and with their installed base, you know, they're going to be a very significant player in that, where you would have this baked into a Nokia phone that you wouldn't have on an LG or another sort of a handset manufacturer. So those three people coming into the market in the last, you know, 30, 60 days, you know, brought a lot of buzz to the space. That would be one thing. Another thing is that perhaps as a result of that, perhaps coincidence, mine is not to judge. In fact, today in the U.S., our Congress is hearing legislation about what's called the Internet Royalty Fairness Act, which would basically say, let's find some level playing field where smaller pure play publishers and big traditional publishers have a very similar, if not identical, royalty structure, so that there's a level playing field and consumers can decide what they want to listen to based on the proposition and the offer, rather than on the royalty structure and who gets paid what, because that's really, you know, right now it's a very imbalanced field.
Yes, that's why you know, you'll get more oldies stations than new hits. Is that why?
No, I think, I mean, if we're going to be honest with each other, so Pandora is the standard bearer for the pure plays, and they are paying an exorbitant amount of their revenue in royalties back to publishers and artists and labels and such. Terrestrial radio does not pay any royalty for music that it plays over the air. They do have to pay a royalty for music that they stream. So you might imagine that they're somewhat slow to adopt digital practices when they have free on one hand and a variable cost structure on the other hand. You don't have to be a Phi Beta Kappa from McGill or Harvard or anywhere else to figure out that that's, you know, there's one that's more attractive than the other. So whereby if we were to level the rates, where if I listen to Tragically Hip, making a Canadian reference, you know, on my traditional radio versus on my mobile versus on my laptop, that artist should get the same check. Right. It should be one song, one listener. It doesn't matter. Technology has equaled it out. It doesn't matter. It's a matter of convenience. So let's just pay the same royalty for everyone. And if that were the case, I think you'd find traditional radio getting much more evolved, much more aggressive towards digital, because they would understand their cost a little bit more than they do today.
Well, it is. It's a variable. It's like early days in bandwidth consumption with a smartphone. You really didn't know what a bit was, what a byte was, what a megabyte was, and what it would consume. I remember not listening to MLB radio because I didn't know if I would go over my 6 gig limit. And I mean, now It seems ridiculous, right? That you don't even give it a thought. But I mean, for the radio stations, traditional radio stations, if they don't pay anything now to broadcast, will they? I mean, maybe this is speculation, but will they agree to pay to anything to broadcast anywhere when once there wasn't a fee, now there would be? Is that a challenge?
Well, you know, I don't know. Obviously, that's a business decision that they have to make. I remain optimistic that they will. I think the more progressive stations realize that this inequity is really inhibiting them. Yeah. And I think, if we're again being honest, that they would realize that if Pandora and the pure plays were able, if they would be able to get a more favorable royalty structure in place, they would be that much more competitive than they already are, which is considerably competitive. Mm-hmm. And at that point, you may be chasing a horse that's too long out of the barn, and there's a real problem. So I think the smarter ones realize that if we can find an equitable solution, it has to make business sense, and that the customer can win, that has to be part of the equation, then I think they'd be more apt to lean into it, as it were, more vigorously. Until that is in place, I'm not sure that they will, other than in fits and starts.
Yeah, it's always surprising to me. If I was a radio station, a traditional radio station, terrestrial broadcast radio station, towers and all, what's the biggest one in the States there? The one that owns 70 or 80% of the market?
Clear Channel has a lot of stations.
Yeah, so Clear Channel, if I was Clear Channel, and I looked at the up-and-comers, incumbents, if we're being honest here, like Pandora, like Spotify, like RDO, even the new guys like Songs has come out, emerged pretty like a shot out of a cannon. All these guys that are kind of encroaching on their space on the digital side. I would wait until because of the punitive licensing agreements that they have to sign in order to broadcast these things, I would wait until they're all bankrupt. And then I would say, okay, let's change the laws and let's go back in there. And I mean, it might be a little bit predatory, but it's in their best interest, isn't it? To
This is so anti-Canadian, Rob. I'm just shocked that you would have this sort of duplicitous thought process. Well, I'm very shocked and dismayed.
Yes,
but yes, I'm sure there are some people that are going to hang around and wait and see where this nets out. Let the weak ones go to the wayside, and then capitalize on the market that the weak ones actually, in fact, developed.
Yeah, I hate to be first.
It's not the first time that will have happened, and it won't be the last. But the question is, what if they don't go to the wayside? Yeah. Again, have you spotted them too big a lead? Will you ever catch up? I mean, right now what we're seeing is mobile, as we discussed a year ago, has become such a big part of the equation. And the pure plays are doing so much more volume in mobile than the terrestrials. If that switch continues, it could really have a cataclysmic effect on the tower-based model.
Are more people tuning in to digital radio now? Spotify, RDO, even Slacker radio. We'll just keep naming these, but when I say digital, that's what I mean, so we don't have to name them all the time.
Yeah. I can only speak to the ones that we measure. We have a measurement business, as I talked to you about. So we measure Pandora, and we measure Slacker and the group that you mentioned, and we measure AccuRadio and some others. All of those are growing, and frankly, they're growing at a faster rate than traditional radio's digital equivalent. So those pure plays are growing faster than the radio equivalents. Now, why is that? One, oftentimes they have a better mobile application that makes it easier to use, and it's just a better user experience. That would be one reason. The second reason is they have many fewer commercials than terrestrial radio, which again, if terrestrial radio has, say, 12 minutes of commercials over the air on the towers, they also equally, as a rule, have 12 minutes of commercials online. Not only is that a lot in the course of an hour, those commercials are typically 30s and 60s, which for the digital native is just an interminable length of time. You just can't imagine listening to a McDonald's or a Tim Hortons or a Ford or any kind of commercial for 60 seconds. It's just unthinkable. So they don't do that on the pure play side, and as a result, again, their audience is growing at a fairly rapid clip. And the rest of the business, frankly, is at a slower incline. It's growing, but it's a more slow, steady climb, whereas there's a true kind of a hockey stick effect for the pure plays.
So if I get that right, then no ads means bigger business, right? Bigger growth.
No ads means bigger business. In what respect?
Well, just no ads mean the pure play, the digital guys who are not doing long ads or doing fewer ads in per segment, their growth is faster than terrestrial radio. Is it because that they're not doing ads? Is it because it's ad free or relatively ad free?
Sure, that is a big part of it. Their audience is growing because there's not a constant barrage of advertising in terms of minutes and in terms of unit length. So Pandora typically would run, say, a minute or 2 minutes in an hour of radio versus 10, 12, and even more terrestrially. Not only that minute or two is usually comprised of 10s and 15s, which are palatable, and
you deal with them.
And get through them. You deal with them.
So this is interesting because, as I alluded to at the beginning, you guys put out the results of a study that talked about this divide between, or maybe it's not a divide, but a trust factor between traditional radio or traditional media versus digital only. And the results were that more people trust traditional than digital. And for me, that also plays squarely into the revenue question around how digital only plays are going to be able to survive, knowing this, that it takes 12 minutes an hour for tower radio stations to survive, and the digital equivalents are doing 2 minutes, and they're not as trusted from consumer standpoint as the traditional ones. So how is all this going to shake out? I mean, that's pretty significant if you ask me. How do these guys make any money?
Well, we have two different issues there, I think,
Yep.
Rob. So this is a bit of I would say, kind of a horses for courses strategy. When, example, during the recent hurricane here in the New York City area, if you look at some of those stations in that area, they had huge spikes in audience as people in those markets that may not have had electricity even, but they had their mobile, could get an update on what's going on with the storm and how is it moving and when will the lights come back on and all these sort of things. What was very interesting is they had huge explosive growth inside the New York City market. Equally important, they had huge explosive growth outside of the market. So that's where people, maybe like myself, I have a lot of family in that area. So I might tune into a New York City or a tri-state station, figuring that would be the authentic, definitive source of news in that market, as opposed to going on Twitter and having somebody say, I'm looking out my window, I'm in Brooklyn, and it seems like it's fine, or, oh my God, there's people with pitchforks.
There's a shark in the subway. Yes. Yeah.
So for news, I think that very correctly and very logically, the traditional media have built up a reputation for having substantive news facilities in terms of people and reporting and due diligence and processes that maybe some of the more bloggier, the more social-centric digital outlets just don't have. And so if you really want the correct story, I think you would go to and favor traditional media outlets, whether in traditional over-the-air form or in their online equivalents. It's not really how it's distributed, it's how it's created. Mm-hmm. The counterpoint to that, though, is if I want to find out if something that I heard happened right now, most people will go to Twitter just to get corroboration that, oh, there is something that happened. Then that for the depth of the story and the accuracy of the story, they may turn to traditional media.
So I just found out like a second ago that Zig Ziglar died on Twitter. He didn't die on Twitter. He died, and I found out on Twitter. Yeah, he didn't die on Twitter. Like this moment, and then I went and looked onto CNN. They didn't have anything, or didn't looked at the major media outlets. But broken for me on Twitter, as many things are. But I see that so often is that. You said it yourself. We're in a bite-sized world where traditional 30 or 60-second advertisements aren't going to work, and the same thing happens with traditional 1-hour news broadcasts or radio broadcasts. Right? Sometimes I want meat. Sometimes I just want the top. Like, tell me. Like, I got 3 minutes. Give it to me. How when we start to think about the digital only. Radio stations, how have they impacted how traditional radio stations are broadcasting their news, their lineup of content? Has it changed anything, or are they just quite simply, like the newspaper industry did, take what they do on print and put it onto the web? Now, are the radio stations doing the same thing on digital?
Well, I think they are, and I don't know that that's the wrong strategy. So again, the thing that traditional media has is depth of resources, particularly against news. So they are largely approximating their offline, repertoire, as it were, online, which makes perfect sense. And I think equally smart, the Pandoras and the Slackers and the Spotifys of the world at present aren't really trying to be a trusted source for news. They're much more entertainment-based. Whether it's comedy or it's music or it's other kinds of spoken words, they're mainly entertainment-oriented. The notable exception to that is sort of a tweener, and that is public radio in the U.S. So public radio, which I think in certain ways is sort of analogous to CBC.
It is, yeah, very much.
Correct me if I'm wrong. But they don't have advertising over the air. They do actually take some online. Mm-hmm. But they'll go into much more depth even online than they do over the air, which is pretty deep to begin with. So they actually make it more robust. But the commercial stations are basically doing a replication of what they do.
And why do you say that that's a good strategy for them? Like the newspaper industry is struggling with that from print to web to mobile. How they look at it 3 different products, right? And
well, yeah.
So why is this?
I think the presentation layer is really the difference, right? Yeah. So if you're taking printed words, 1,000 words of copy, 1,200 words of copy in the local newspaper, and just digitizing those and putting them on a flat white page, I think you're doing yourself a disservice. If you incorporate historical footage, links to citations, video, a social commentary application or form, If you add those things into the content, it becomes much more robust. And in fact, what you have is you take something, you almost just begin the process, and then the audience actually shapes the process further, and it evolves and mushrooms over time. Same with radio. If you're just going to do your verbalization of the news online as you do over the air, I think you're missing the boat. You have this ability to add maps, pictures, video, trivia or surveys or incorporating other data points that are related but maybe not directly into this, just to make it a much more robust experience, plus the ability for the consumer to weigh in via two-way communication where they can comment on things, they can share things offline that they can't do, or online rather, that they can't do offline. There's a lot more robust opportunity online than offline. So to replicate it identically is actually a mistake.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I agree with you wholeheartedly, and I always wonder about that because the radio stations, I mean, I listen to it. You know, I have a radio app that just broadcasts any radio station that I want, and I typically would tune into to a New York-based one or even an Ottawa-based one because I don't have a radio anymore in my house. I just did it. Right. It was the only way that I consume traditional radio when I'm outside of my car. But it's always out of context, isn't it? Because I'm listening to localized or local New York or local wherever advertisements that don't make any sense to me. But I'm still broadcasting. I'm still listening to that news. I mean, how do you balance that? Like, you've got to have some clients that are out there that are leveraging digital, traditional radio stations that are leveraging digital in a way that makes more sense than just broadcasting the same stuff. Ottawa, New York doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense. So one-to-one is something that's commonly, a bouquet commonly thrown around advertising, and it makes sense. Where, a former boss of mine famously said, we don't want to run dog food ads for cat lovers. So, we would want to segment our audience so that it makes some amount of sense and there's little waste. Equally, though, we can do the same with content. You can do one-to-one content. In fact, the technology is in existence today to make that happen. Now, you need scale to make it cost efficient, but to use the exact analogy you used, except I'm going to bring it inside of the US just because there's different royalty structures and things in place. But say that I am here in Boston, as I am, and I want to listen to WXRT radio in Chicago, as I do, which is probably my favorite terrestrial radio station. So I love that content. And when it comes to the commercial break, aside from it being too long and filled with too lengthy commercials, I'm getting stuff for Chicagoland, Ford dealer. Doesn't make any sense. I'm not in a position to capitalize on that. So we should be serving me a Greater Boston commercial, right, for Ford dealers of Massachusetts or whatever the case may be. So we should be making the variable parts variable based on location. Equally, if you were traveling, if I was listening to XRT and I was driving through St. Louis in my car with mobile technology, right? We know where you are. We should serve an ad that is appropriate to where you are that you can act on it. That's the beauty of using mobile. It's context, not just a delivery platform, but context. Where are you? What do we think you're doing? What time of day is it? We'll serve the appropriate ad. But you can do the same thing with content. You can have content chunks about news from Buffalo, sports from Chicago, and global news from London. That's all technically feasible. You just have to build a marketplace for it at scale.
Now, I got to ask, I mean, are traditional radio stations interested in doing that now? Or is this just too much work, or is it beyond their abilities right now to even comprehend that as they're running these, their radio stations across the country?
All of the above. I mean, I think there's nobody that would hear that and just out of hand say, silly idea. Yeah. Makes sense. Now, the question I would have is, at what expense, and is there an advertising offset to be gained by doing it? In other words, that's where the scale part comes in. If you and I are the only two people listening to Chicago, it doesn't really make sense to give us a different ad, because the technical expense of that is probably, significantly outweighs the revenue upside. When that comes to scale, though, it's clearly going to be the way to go, where people are going to say, this is stupid. I don't want to listen to Chicago ads. I'm not in Chicago. And it'll just become standard operating procedure. But the question is when. And with the addition of the Apples of the world and the Microsofts and the Nokias and, of course, the Spotifys, I think that day is rapidly coming. If it's not here, I think it's coming quickly. And I think the biggest radio groups will be the first to adopt.
All right. Well, I mean, it's interesting because When we spoke in October of last year, I talked about this thing. I was like, I don't understand why we're just taking free radio frequency and trying to jam up our costly bandwidth with radio, right? We're just trying to replicate it in a digital space. And then, you know, my thought process has changed quite a bit. I mean, I carry an iPhone 5. I don't have a single song from my entire library on this. It is completely streamed from the cloud. Everything that I do is up there. Every song I listen to is from up there. So my mind has changed quite dramatically because I see the value there. But I just wonder, can these radio stations make this transition to what we're talking about there, where the reliance on the cell tower might become diminished, but the audience potential is huge. But can they make that transition? And I always, you know, I put it in light of what's going on in the newspaper industry because they're getting hammered, right? And they're moving into a digital first world, right? That's what their mantras are. But you know, less than 15% of their revenue is coming from digital. 85% of the revenue is subscription and traditional print advertising. So if you think it's digital first, they're going to die before they make that transition because they got $1 billion worth of printing presses. Some of these agencies, large companies, maybe not that much. But they've got that infrastructure and they're having a hard time turning. How can the radio stations not make the same mistakes that the newspapers have done over the last 5 or 6 years, 10 years?
Well, I mean, it's a great question, and frankly, it's a great analog because I mean, I think this is one of the things you hear a lot about in B school is, you know, that the insurgency relatively rarely comes from the incumbents.
Right. Hey,
you know, it really does take somebody else to come in and disrupt your marketplace. But you're seldom going to upset your own apple.
Well, that's it. I mean, Clayton Christensen calls it the innovator's dilemma, right? Right. That's correct. Exactly what it is that it's not the incumbents that knock off that really innovate, but that's what Pandora is doing. That's what Spotify are doing, right? These guys are coming in. So do you think that transition can happen from the radio stations?
Well,
you're helping them. I know that. I sincerely
hope so, because you know what? I think radio is a great medium. And I think it's very much worth not only preserving, but advancing. And I think that technology can advance radio. I don't think that you make a distinction between listening to radio on your mobile or on your desktop or when you're in your car and your you know, regular radio. I don't think that you make the distinction. But I think that radio makes it an all-important distinction. And I understand some of the reasons because the profitability of one is different than some of the others. But it's sort of like if the newspaper people fell in love with wood-based paper products and said that's newspaper, they're probably not around anymore, right? They went the way of the hula hoop and the dinosaur. If you thought about it as the writing, the reporting, the editing, the photography, the news that is created in a newspaper, the content, they might be doing well. I think the New York Times has a paywall model and everything that I read says they're doing quite well. If your content is crap, though, there's no audience for it online or offline. And I think radio needs to forget about the delivery mechanism, whether it's tower-based or mobile or laptop or Xbox and things that we haven't even contemplated yet. Worry about getting the content correct, worrying about making it accessible to whomever wants it, whenever, wherever they are, on whatever device they happen to have handy, and properly monetizing that. If they do that, I think they can be very successful. What they're up against is precedents. There's not many people that have been able to do that pivot, but I remain optimistic that they will be the exception, not the rule.
Well, there's no doubt that radio has a special place, right? In media, it is a it is a universal language, pretty much everywhere. That can tune into radio, tune into anything that has to do with radio, and it's oftentimes just the power that you need to turn on in order to be able to consume it, and batteries and such. So it's democratized news gathering. It's very mobile. It's all these things that we talk about, these smartphones, right? Yeah. But it is getting much more competitive for these guys because dollars are stretched. The radio stations are fighting for dollars not only with their traditional foes, newspapers, and they work together and they become foes, but newspapers, and you've got these new breed of digital radio stations. You've also got social media, which becomes the nervous system of the internet, which is really where news breaks. So you've got Twitter, and then you've got Facebook, and the dollars are going to those guys as well, social media spend. And then you've got this other phenomenon, which is the newspapers and the television broadcasters sitting here looking around thinking, oh my God, our business is crumbling. Our walls are coming down. Oh my God. We're going to go into their business, right? So for a long time, radio was looked upon as stealing from the newspaper, right? The morning news, it was just pulled out from the newspapers. And every local news station does that. There's no way to deny that. And they admit it. In Ottawa, it's like, hey, and from the Ottawa Citizen, the front page of the Ottawa Citizen, they talk like that. But now newspapers are moving into the radio space. They're doing audio broadcasts through podcasts and video, and the same thing with traditional broadcast networks, television. How do they fare against these guys with a huge audience as well? It's a long way to ask that.
Well, I mean, listen, what's true is that people are going to want to consume what they want around their schedule. Not when it's convenient for the network or the newspaper, or, imagine if your newspaper came at 6 a.m. and it expired at 6:30, right? It just went poof on your front step. Not a good model, right? People are going to want to read that when they're commuting, at lunchtime, whenever they get a chance. So the idea of making content portable, content portability is a really critical notion. And radio has put its toe in the water with some limited podcasts, but I wouldn't say it's done an exemplary job there. So I think that's key, making their content portable and accessible for posterity. I couldn't listen to the morning show in the morning, but I really like those guys. Let me listen to it when I have a sec. I think that's a good idea. Some stations do, most stations do not. I think making it portable and time neutral is really, really important. I think also really what we're talking about is just a great big mashup called media.
Yeah.
I think the distinction between radio and newspaper and video is increasingly irrelevant. It really is. It's increasingly irrelevant. They all have pictures, they all have words, they all have audio, and they are all generally talking about the same thing outside of the core business, which is, television shows or radio programs or whatever the case may be. So I think they're competing against everybody, and they better have an equal or superior level of sophistication, or it could be a shortish fight, right?
Well, that's it. We're starting to see that. My reference point is always in Canada. We had a national organization called CanWest, and they owned television, radio stations, and a bunch of newspapers. And they got together, and that went bankrupt 2 years ago. And they sold off all the assets, and now there's a newspaper and television and radio. They're separate entities. Because that kind of combination didn't work, because they were trying to bring these three distribution mechanisms together. But now they're doing it all anyways, the same way, right? They're just doing it within their own brands. So have we really evolved that much? And are we really moving in the right direction when it comes to this? Are we moving fast enough, I think, is my question.
Well, I mean, I think we'd have to evaluate that on a case-by-case basis. I think in Boston here, there's an interesting thing that happened just this year, I want to say late summer, where the Boston Globe, which is subsidiary to the New York Times, they didn't buy the call letters, but they bought basically root and branch the staff of an incredibly venerable Boston alternative radio station. And they rechristened it Radio BDC, which is short for RadioBoston.com. So they took a celebrity, really, group of programmers and DJs and talent, and they took them out of the radio medium altogether. And now that group of people lives creating a station that only lives online. Interesting.
Very.
Would I have suspected that kind of coalition or innovation would have come from the newspaper business? No, I wouldn't have. But again, I think they realize, okay, we have a good amount of content here. How can we keep people engaged for longer and leverage the assets that we have? And the other thing that makes radio a little bit different, a little bit special, and I would argue a little bit more important as things go more mobile, is that it is sort of a very, dare I say, patient lover in a world of jealous lovers. In the world of digital, we're doing a lot of things with our eyes, right? We're looking at videos on YouTube. We're reading things at Huffington Post. We're getting text messages. We're always kind of using our eyes. Newspaper and video really require that. They're just not very good without it. Radio works beautifully in the background. You can read while listening to the radio. You can write your email while listening to the radio. You can do your PowerPoint while listening to the radio. It's a great companion piece. And as mobile becomes more and more of the preferred distribution model, you don't find a lot of people watching video on their mobile in a relative sense, or reading long newspaper articles and all that. Audio is a great way to do that. Radio has the inside lane on audio, although they haven't sewn it up. If they were to really lean into the audio-ness of them, I think that would be a huge thing for them, instead of trying too much to ape what print and video do.
Yeah, I think they have a distinct advantage there, that they don't have that they may have towers, but they don't have printing presses, and they don't have that legacy piece. It seems like a natural transition, much more natural for radio to get into this space, right? They've always been in audience development, right? It's share of audience, whereas the newspaper hasn't been. They've been into subscribers and page views, right? So, and now the newspapers are moving into audience, and I think that's when they start to look at the encroachment on traditional media, like other traditional media like radio.
Yep.
Well, what about how is there a way? I mean, you guys have obviously got such great experience working with the radio stations, both terrestrial and the new guys, the new breed of digital only. How does Triton help these guys, the traditional ones, bring over to digital? How do you help these digital guys generate more audience? Talk about how you guys help them, because it's very important to put this in context where this isn't a bleak future. It could be a bleak future if you don't do something about it now. If you don't start to engage and start to move into this digital space, as we've talked about throughout this whole episode. But talk about Triton for a second and how you guys help these guys transition. Any case studies, examples that you can bring up?
Well, I mean, the biggest thing that we do and we try to do for all of our clients, or certainly the majority of them, is help them monetize their assets. And what does that mean?
Yes.
It means that a digital advertiser has different requirements than a traditional radio advertiser. They're going to want things like geolocation, which is a non-issue over the air. When I buy a radio spot, I get the whole audience, wherever they may be. If they're within earshot, I get them. Man, woman, child, older, younger, richer, poor. They're all part of the same buy. Whereas a digital buyer is going to look to segment and parse out audience a little bit more directly. They're also going to look to do things outside of audio, like click here to buy, or click here to find out more, or go to this, enter this code, or take a picture of this and upload. You know, there's much more interactivity digitally than when you're just listening to an audio spot. So we try to provide both the technology, Rob, and the know-how for stations to kind of cross that bridge and saying, okay, you have to approach the marketplace differently in a digital context than you do on the traditional radio side. And we can help you. And the technology is there so that, again, dog food commercials go to dog owners and cat food commercials can go to cat lovers. We can show you how to do that, how to find that out, how to parse your streams, how to deliver one-to-one content, one-to-one advertising, how to measure that and present that case back to your advertiser and the agencies. I mean, that's really where we're focused right now, because as we've said in the beginning, all these guys are smart guys. They haven't gotten, and women, they haven't gotten to where they have out of luck, with a possible couple of exceptions. But, you know, these are generally very bright people with very distinguished careers. The problem is there's not enough money on the digital side at present for them to want to divert from the main generator of terrestrial-based advertising. So we try to help them create that revenue so that it is a more palatable, less scary leap. And it's not a leap of faith. There's a business case.
I come back to it. That transition, though, I mean, if I'm in that business, must be just frightening, because, you know, the saying in print is that you're trading dollars for digital dimes, right? Basically, and that must be harsh, right? To think about this, because it's like 1/7 the revenue that comes in from digital versus print. And people have that expectation, right? We've got this app economy where everything becomes free. It's a slow decline to free for software developers. And now we're starting to look at, you know, the democratization of advertising that Google has brought on with on their web properties, and soon to mobile properties, and Facebook, and segmentation. And I only want to pay for action. I don't want to pay for audience development. Like this is just, there's just pieces here that just keep piling on top of traditional media, that I could understand that they just want to extract as much value as they can, while they can, because this corner is so tight to turn for them. How do you guys help them or convince them? I mean, that they have to do this,
Well, I mean, we can bitch and moan about, the digital dimes conundrum all we want, but at the end of the day, if you're not going to be paid in dollars, move on. What we try to do is make sure you take as many dimes off the table as is possible. And as I repeat, I really think that the audio proposition is vastly superior to many of the advertising propositions out there because of some of the things that digital enables. Yeah. It has an inherently companion nature to it. You can do other things while doing it. It is very segmentable. There are many fewer ads going on in audio than there are in video and certainly in display. So you're not barraged with 1,000 different shiny things. And I think you have a level of engagement with radio that you just don't get. People are really connected emotionally to radio, whether it's because of the music they love or the personalities they've come to know over time. It's a deeper connection than many other media. Now, that doesn't mean anything if you don't monetize it.
Right.
So we have to provide the technology and in some cases the know-how of how to take more dimes off the table. And Rob, if they become nickels, it doesn't matter, right? Would you rather have 25 nickels or $1?
Yeah. And that's it. I think that's the important part right here is that it isn't. We can focus on the terrible state of the transition period from traditional to digital. But really what we should be focusing on, as you said it so well, and I'll slap my hand for keep bringing it up, is that just focus on collecting as many of those nickels as you can, right? Or dimes or whatever it is. It doesn't matter.
And if pennies, then they're pennies. Yeah. It's what do they equal at the end of the day?
Yeah.
What do they equal? And if they equal more than you were doing before, let's put more gas on that and see if we can even do better.
So how long does this transition take? I mean, I know it's next to impossible because 2 years ago we weren't even thinking this way, right? Maybe some of us were, but 3 years ago we weren't, right? It was full steam ahead. But does this take? This is a massive upheaval, but does this take a year, 2 years, 5 years? How long do these Spotifys and RDOs and Slackers have to hold on before they start to see the revenue that they deserve for pioneering this space?
Well, wish I knew. We've been at this for 6 years at Triton Digital. We've grown, incredibly. We have almost 300 people now, and we're all over the globe, and we're doing very strong revenue numbers. But we don't think we're nearly halfway up the mountain. And I think the two things that have to happen, and, is it 13? God, I hope so. But, we have to have more demand from the digital marketplace, which is stating a case about the value of the audio audience and restating it and stating it a third time in a way that is persuasive to them and providing the tools for them to, once persuaded, to actually do something about it. That's one thing. Another critical thing, though, is getting this royalty piece figured out, Rob, where people can put their best foot forward digitally and not be, I'm going to use a made-up word, disincentivized to go digital because it's free over the air and it's costly online. That's a bad equation and it's not fair. And by the way, it's actually consumers, listeners that are suffering because they're not getting the full expanse of what they really could have because some people are either sitting out entirely or really half-assing their online presence because it's costly and they frankly hope people don't listen.
Yeah. Do you see an end to that? Is there movement along that line? Is there something that's going to happen what's the catalyst for that? Big radio?
Well, I think it's well understood that the U.S. government is highly effective and incredibly expeditious. So I think maybe, 2 days max, this thing will be sorted through. But no, I mean, I think we're probably early innings of that. Yeah. But there's some powerful people involved. And what's interesting about this internet fairness issue, Pandora tends to be the standard bearer for that. And I think, maybe they were first into this, but Clear Channel is a part of this as well. There are a lot of people that just want this to be worked out in a way that makes sense because they see the opportunity. So it's not just the domain of the pure plays. It's the more advanced terrestrial stations too. However, the negotiations will be what they will be. The government is what it is. We're hoping this gets sorted through by acclaim where everybody sort of sees it the same way and it moves quickly. And I think, frankly, in the U.S. we have many bigger fish to fry than this. But I do think Once that gets sorted out, I think we'll be in
Next is
a
radio.
much better place to see what's going on.
Well, I mean, it's interesting, and I don't know if you can answer this because I know it might impact some relationships that you haven't, and don't feel compelled to. But I think of something like Clear Channel. I'm a Springsteen fan, always have been my entire life. Not a Dixie Chicks fan, but a Springsteen fan. And Springsteen has run into, and I know some of the artists have run into challenges with this almost monopoly called Clear Channel, right? Where if they say, listen, don't play this song, it influences every state, right? There's radio stations everywhere. So, the answer to that was this free-flowing Pandora Slacker, look, play whatever you want, but we'll get dinged for licensing. Where it's also a state of, this open source movement that we've seen here, where no one company should own the airwaves and influence the airwaves, like we see today. Does that, like when you think about that, is that enough for an organization to decide not to support this, or should we be concerned that one day the internet and mobile will be run by one large organization?
You ask a good question. I think the web is inherently democratic with a small d. So I think it's very hard for any one person to get of a sufficient size to have this conundrum that you mentioned in reference to Clear Channel and Bruce Springsteen. Obviously, Google and there's some other people that are quite large that maybe would test that theory.
Yep.
Apple, absolutely. I don't think so, though. And I think what you find is that the web offers a lot of customization and choice and control, where if somebody wants to listen to Bruce Springsteen, it's pretty easy. You don't have to scan the dial, right? You can go to Pandora, put on your Bruce Springsteen channel. You can go to Spotify and go to, your favorite Springsteen album, your favorite live Springsteen concert, et cetera, et cetera. You can listen to it when you want to, and that's why it will prevail in the end. So the degree to which radio emulates some of that customization and choice and control that's offered on the web, I think it will thrive, proportional to that.
Yeah, it's a good answer. And you think about that, is that the same thing happens in any other media. If you can't find the news on one channel, if you can't get behind the paywall of the New York Times, you'll find it somewhere else, right? And I think
exactly
there's all of this is basically leaky sieves or leaky. So I think that when you have that much choice, all of a sudden it becomes democratized. All right, location. I just want to talk for a moment about location and the importance of location-based marketing on the impact that it has on what we're talking about here, digital radio, because that really is where I think that the digital radio can have the biggest impact on solo mo. Give you an example. Songza, right, is a great service. Digital radio playlists. I love the way that they've done all of the timing. You wake up in the morning, it's like, hey, click on the wake up channel.
Right.
But they do, which always blows my mind, they do banner ads, right? Like, what do you do with a radio app is that you hit go and I put it in my pocket and I leave, right? But they pay banner ads. No audio cues at all. I would think that location-based audio cues in digital radio is a no-brainer. Is this the future is location-based marketing the future of radio?
I think it's a huge part of the equation. I think for the reason you mentioned, display and even video is certainly display is very inefficient in a mobile context, whether you're plugging that phone into your dash and driving, or you're driving and can't look at stuff, but you can listen, or you put on your headphones, put that in your pocket, and are on your way. Audio, again, is really the thing that resonates the most. And by the way, it has maximum attentiveness because it's not competing with, you don't have simultaneous audio ads, you have one ad at a time. And if it's 10 or 15 seconds, I think it's quite effective. And it's further accentuated in the effectiveness department if it's, hey, you're about to walk by, Not Your Average Joe's restaurant. The happy hour is from 4 to 6 and there's $5 apps. Yeah. Okay, so again, that's the context that mobile and digital provides to traditional media that can really make it special and make it pop if it's properly leveraged. And in defense of everybody not doing it, without scale, it's just added expense without offset revenue. So it's just a matter of maturity of the space.
Yeah, that's a perfect example of that. Certainly when you start to think about the potential around location-based marketing, you're right. It's that one-to-one marketing, but if it's literally only one-to-one, The expense outweighs it, but somebody's got to start to invest in this kind of technology to be able to build these out sooner rather than later, I would think.
Yeah, I think the technology is very much not the issue relative to just pure scale. I think in the U.S. we say that 92% of households, I want to say, have access to traditional radio, over-the-air radio. And I think that the number is probably a little bit less than that in terms of digital, whether it's mobile or desktop, but the penetration, the actual usage would be considerably less than that, probably in the 30-35% range at last, if I were to conjure up the last eMarketer data I saw. So once that 35 comes closer to the 92 and you have scale, the technology is ready to roll. It's just spreading out fixed cost over a larger audience and making it more palatable.
So for you guys who are squarely sitting in the middle of the future of radio, right? You guys are right there. You balance traditional and you're working with the pure play digital. Does it ever get frustrating for you guys to say like you just want this to move a little bit fast? You've been doing it for 6 years. It's like, come on, let's just get this thing moving faster, faster, faster. Does it ever get frustrating for you guys?
I wake up and kick the dog every day. I just can't believe, it's not here yet. But, honestly, I'm kind of the eternal optimist. I think every day is going to be the day.
Yeah.
And frankly, every day has been the day. It's just not been, all caps and exclamation points. Every day, audience builds more than the day prior. That's just a fact. We see the numbers. And, it's just, it might not be one giant seismic thing that happens. It could be just a series of little things. And one day you kind of pull back and say, wow, it was 2 million people that were listening concurrently last month. And 6 months on, it's 10 million people. And that's enough to get really any advertiser's perspective, especially since we know a lot about each and every one of those 10 million in a way that broadcasters have no idea.
Yeah.
And that we can serve 10 million ads to 10 million people if we want to, or we can serve one ad to 10 million people in a way that you just can't do otherwise. So it may be just a slow climb, or, there could be this sort of event that happens. If Apple were to do something very significant, that could be one of the things. They tend to have an immediate impact on a marketplace. That could be the thing. But, we just keep developing the technology to keep in step with the times. And when it happens, our clients will be ready because we've been working hard on the R&D to keep them abreast of trends and ready to capitalize when the worm turns.
Well, I think the idea of Apple moving into the space, it is, if you think about their power, 130 million people using iOS devices right now, that all of a sudden, adding one new icon onto this,
right,
eclipses audiences from some of the biggest radio stations, national or international, anywhere. Same thing with Nokia, right? That despite what everybody says about them, they are still dominant in developing nations and in Europe and Asia, right? So one icon could change the media industry overnight, couldn't it?
Well, absolutely. And I tell you what, don't sleep on Xbox. I think we all underestimate the number of people that are gamers and the types of people that they are. I think we all have this idea that it's 14 to 16-year-olds with a big bag of Doritos in the cellar, doing, weird stuff. It's really not. It's pervasive. It's across all socioeconomic lines. And if the Xbox became the new radio, they have a significant penetration. People spend lots of time gaming. If radio was part and parcel of that experience, maybe that's the little trigger that takes it from niche to mainstream. So, or it could be the aggregation of all three of those things and others that we haven't even forecast yet.
And I think that's what's so amazing about this is that there's no clear one leader that's gonna knock this down, but there are many of these potential disruptors that could accelerate this industry. And I think that's what's so fascinating about it. I love sitting in the middle and watching what's going on in the media space. You have that great vantage point from where you sit, obviously, at Triton. Last question here, and then, Patrick, I will let you go. What gets you jazzed? I know the whole industry does, but when you see new entrants coming in like Songzo or Spotify or RDO or these guys, I mean, what gets you excited about these things? Is there anything out there that maybe we haven't heard of that you've seen that would say like, hey, just keep an eye out for this thing or this company or this app? Is there anything out there that you can leave us with?
I'll leave you with a big and a small. How about
Sure.
that?
Love it.
So I don't think a day goes by that someone won't ping me on Facebook and say, "Oh, I see that you're listening to such and such a playlist or
Yeah.
such and such an artist, and I didn't know you liked that, or who is it, or what's it about?" And a conversation will ensue about that. And for people that really love music as I do, this harkens back to the glory days of the 80s and 90s when you sort of evaluated and ranked people, their social status based on their ability to make playlists and mixtapes and their CD collection or record collection, right? This is bringing that back in vogue, which I think is great. So I think continued social integration, and I think that, really Spotify has done the best work of that. I think that really takes it to a new level where at the heart of discussion is music and radio. And I think that's really, really cool and will only get cooler. Right now, I think it's just in its infancy. I think it could get much more powerful than it is, and it's really powerful right now. Then I saw an app the other day from a local group here in Boston, over in Cambridge, I think. They kind of blew me away, and it's called Timbre, Timbre. You can go to the App Store and check it out. But Timbre is location-based for live music. So wherever you and your phone happen to be, you can check out the Timbre app, and it will say, okay, within 5 miles of you, these are the venues and the bands that are playing. And you might say, oh, I've never heard of that place. And you can go to the website of the bar, whatever the case may be. I've never heard of that band. You can listen to a sample of the band from iTunes. Oh, geez, that really sounds cool. You can buy tickets inside of the app. So it's this really cool live music, geo-aware discovery app that I think is very, very hot. We'll see where it goes. I hadn't seen anything quite like it. It's very elegantly made. And it's a cool thing if you travel as I do and you end up in East Jahunga, Kansas or something, you can pull it out and just say, what's going on around here? And it'll give you some ideas and let you do some free samples on that. And I think it's a really cool idea. So I give them massive credit for a big idea.
There you go. And I just pulled it up. It's Timbre, Timbre app.com, or you can find it on the iTunes. It's the band discovery app. That's very cool. It says that lets music find you. There you go.
Yeah.
Get it from Patrick. All right, Patrick, where should we send them for more information about you guys?
Why don't you go to tritondigital.com and you can keep up of who we're working with and the kinds of applications we're making and the kinds of services we're providing, to whom and where. And also, we just have a lot of industry news on there too, Rob. So if you want to find out what's going on in the industry, even with people we don't work with, we tend to cover all that and put it on the website.
Yeah, and what I appreciate that is that you have a number of white papers, case studies, some great videos. You release monthly, audience numbers through it, and I think that certainly, and you do. You keep people up to date with what's going on in the industry, and so reemphasize that. Go to tritondigital.com and take a look and reach out to the newly christened chief strategic officer, right, Patrick?
And mustachio, yes, if I may be so bold as to point out.
Yes, and maybe the next time you're on, you won't have that, because you have been so kind to do this. It is November, so it is Movember. I think that we're going to have to do this again, maybe February, March timeframe, so we can erase the memory of the mustache. How's that?
Every day I wake up in a cold sweat, and I haven't seen my wife in the entire month of November, so... Hopefully, let's do it in a different month. We have 11 others to choose from.
I know. I don't know why. November. It seems I've had a couple of guys come on with mustaches, so I just should put a caveat at the beginning of every episode that, listen, anything that's filmed in November of every year, if you see a mustache, it's mostly Movember related, not out of desire.
In my case, it is.
Yes. Entirely. All right, so go to tritondigital.com. We've been speaking with Patrick Reynolds, who is the Chief Strategic Officer for Triton. There's a ton of information. I will link to our previous interview that we did, or episode that we did last October. You'll see some great insight from there as well. And we covered brand new things this episode. So the other one is completely different. It'll give you a perspective of where we come from. But Patrick, I really appreciate you doing this. I will have you on. Saw his mustache. As this happens, and it would be interesting to see if Apple makes any announcements. I'm going to reach out to you because we're going to get you on here to talk about that.
I would welcome that. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and I know your audience has got a lot of good questions. I've heard a lot of follow-up from the first episode, Great. And keep them coming, and let's talk again real soon.
Excellent. We've been speaking with Patrick Reynolds, the Chief Strategic Officer for Triton. Go to tritondigital.com. Patrick, thank you. Folks out there, wherever you are, whatever you are doing, you're probably listening to this on the headphones right now, like a radio. I really appreciate you guys doing that, taking the time to listen and learn. Take the lessons that Patrick has imparted on us today. Use them in your business. Don't mimic, emulate. And if you have any questions, reach out to Patrick. I'm sure he will answer anything that comes your way, or reach out to me. And I appreciate you doing this. We'll see you next time on Untether.tv. Thanks, Patrick.
Thanks, guys. Take care.